So this unit, or this lesson, 3.2, we're talking about corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. We're going to abbreviate that because this actually gets used a lot in this course. So that'll be a long phrase to write every single time. So when we abbreviate it, we're just going to abbreviate it to CPCTC. And that stands for corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. CPCTC. So by the end of this, you'll be able to identify corresponding sides and angles in the two congruent triangles, and you're going to know that they're congruent. It's going to have a lot to do with what we do over the next couple of days, next couple of lessons. Everything we're dealing with, almost everything in this entire unit, is all about congruent triangles, so it's important that you have a good understanding. And when you can use a congruent statement and identify corresponding parts and discover the corresponding vertices through rigid motion. So sometimes it's going to be a reflection, a rotation, a translation, but you'll be able to see that they are congruent through all that. So we're going to jump right in. Here's two triangles. Write congruent statements based on the drawings below. So what you're going to be looking at is, we've talked about these before, when they have the tick marks, that shows that they are congruent. So 3 tick marks is congruent to 3 tick marks. 2 tick marks is congruent to 2 tick marks. 1 tick mark is congruent to 1 tick mark. But we're going to write out the actual statements. So for the corresponding sides, we're going to go through just like I just showed you with the, let's start with yellow. All right, in yellow. So the side with 1 yellow tick mark, MO, is congruent to the side with the other 1 yellow tick mark. Now what's important about this when you are writing these down is you need to write them the exact order so that the letters match up. So it's important that you identify the rigid motion first. So to make these two triangles match up, it would be like a fold. It would be a reflection over a line. That was a terrible line. Try that again. Over a line kind of like that. If it reflected, they would match up. Which means, since I wrote letter M first, M would be corresponding with T. So T needs to be the first letter we write on the other side. Every letter, when you do a congruent statement, needs to match up in order. So then we went to O, which would correspond with S. So MO is congruent to TS. Then you can do the next side. So that was 1 tick mark. Let's move on to the red 2 tick marks. That is side NO. And that's got to go in the same order. So since we did NO, did top to bottom, we got to do the same thing. Top to bottom, US. And then the third side, the blue 3 tick mark sides. We'll say NM. And we have to go in the same corresponding order. So since we started with N, which was up top, we got to start with U, because that's up top in the other triangle, to T, UT. Everything when you do these needs to be labeled in corresponding order. We're going to do the same thing with the angles. Angle O, congruent to angle S. Those were kind of orange. I'll be red. That's the best I've got right now. Angle O is congruent to angle S. We know that because they both have the 90-degree marks. Then we've got, that looks like purple, angle N and angle U. Those are corresponding, so they are congruent. They were marked congruent. Then the third angles that we're going to look at, we haven't done angle M yet. Angle M is supposed to be in green. Try that again. Angle M is congruent to angle T. They both had the two arcs on it. That's how you know they're congruent. You got to write the statement. So this is a bit of a review from Unit 1. We're going to rotate triangle ABC 270 degrees counterclockwise about the origin. And we're going to translate left 4 and down 1 and call that triangle DEF. So first, we're going to rotate 270 counterclockwise about the origin. If you've got your transparency paper that you can trace over, you can use that. Or tracing paper or whatever. But the idea is you need your origin marked. I'm going to do red here. And you got to trace your triangle. And we're rotating 270 counterclockwise, which is that way. So when you rotate 270 counterclockwise and your origin needs to stay still, this is 90, 180, 270, and my origin got a little bit moved around, so I'm going to move it back. That's where the triangle is going to end up after the 270-degree rotation. If you have your tracing paper, you trace it out, hold that still with your pencil at the origin, and spin the paper 270 so you can see where it goes. Or you could apply the rule that we learned in Unit 1. The rules are a little bit hard to remember. You could, you'd have that written down in your Unit 1 toolbox so you'd know an easy place to find it if you had your Unit 1 notebook on you. So that rule from Unit 1 is -y, comma, x. Got my negative signs mixed up. It's y negative x. So you could apply that rule. So then you take a little bit longer than it would with the paper, but either way is fine. So, and it says we're going to label that DEF. That means the point that was A is now D. The point that was B is now E. And the point that was C is now F. C is now F. It is very important that you match them up in the right order. Normally we would have said like A goes to A prime, but it said to call it DEF. So don't call it A prime, B prime, C prime. So therefore all the sides, so well first we got a question here. Is triangle ABC congruent to DEF? Yes, they're congruent. That's a rigid motion. Oh, we didn't translate yet. I got to finish that off. But both of those, rotations and translations, are both rigid. So yes, they're going to be congruent. So let's finish this off. Left 4, down 1. So each point. Left 4, down 1. That was D. E, left 4, down 1. And F, left 4, down 1. So there it is after the rotation and translation. Yes, they are congruent because both rotations and translations are rigid. That means they're going to stay congruent. It's the exact same shape, just moved around. Therefore, all the sides are congruent also. So we can say which sides are congruent. We can say AC is congruent to this side, and we got to get it in the same order. Since C is the right angle, F is the right angle, C and F have to go together. So A and D match up. A and D match up. So if we start with A, we got to start with D. And then C matches with F. You have to name them the letters in corresponding order. You could have said CA and FD. If you flipped them both, that's okay too. And then we got the other side, AB. A to B. A we know matched up with D. So since A was our first letter, D is the first letter. And then B, that was corresponding with letter E down here. So since we wrote B, now we got to write E. And then the third side, BC would be the third side. We didn't write that one yet. So BC is right here. That corresponds with this bottom side. Remember, we rotated it. B matched up with E. And C matched up with F. You kind of have to replay the rotation every time to see what matches up with what. The other thing you can do, though, which is going to make this easier down the line, since the triangles were written out already for you, triangle ABC goes with DEF. That means wherever there's an A, D is going to be corresponding because it's written out the first time in corresponding order. A goes with D. A goes with D because they were both first here. D was the middle letter and E was the middle letter, so those are going to match up. Wherever we had a B, we had an E. Wherever we had a B, we had an E. And the same thing with CF. C and F would go together every single statement you write. So we can also do the same thing with angles, which is going to be really, really easy because we just talked about how from the congruence, triangle congruent statement, everything matches up. So angle A is going to match with angle D. Angle A matches and is congruent to angle D. Angle B was the next one. I'm going to color code. Angle B and angle E. And then one more time, we can go up and look at the congruent statement. Angle C with angle F. Now, the reason all of these things are true is because the triangles are congruent. Since the triangles are congruent, all of their corresponding parts are congruent. And that's what the title of this lesson was. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. CPCTC. That's the because. Every single one of these statements is CPCTC. All right, this time we're going to reflect over the line x equals -2. So find -2 on the x-axis. A lot of students have a hard time remembering which way to draw these lines. -2 on the x-axis. So here's the x-axis. Here's -2. It's going to be the line that passes through that point. Straight up and down. You can do that better. You know it has to go straight up and down because it has to pass through the x-axis, which is going sideways. So it's going to go straight up and down. If you drew it side to side, it wouldn't pass through the x-axis. It would be the x-axis. Now we are reflecting over that line. So that means point G is going to go to point J. Point G, reflect it, it's going to go to point J. Point H is going to go to point K because they're in corresponding order. H, 1, 2, 3, 4 away, 1, 2, 3, 4 away. That's K. And then last, we've got I goes to L. 2 spaces to the left, 2 spaces to the right. And you can draw that triangle. So are the 2 shapes congruent? Are the 2 triangles congruent? Yes, because it's a reflection and reflections keep congruency. So those are congruent because they are rigid motions. A reflection is a rigid motion that's going to keep congruency. That means all the sides are going to be congruent. So we can take side GH, and that's going to be congruent to side JK. Since we start with G, you got to start with J. Then you can take side HI, and that's going to correspond and be congruent to KL. We started with H, we got to start with K. And then the last side would be GI. We started with G, so we're going to start with J and go to L. That would have been better if that was like JO. Like a missed opportunity. Missed opportunity. G.I. Joe. So we can also put those congruency marks. 1 tick mark on GH and JK. 2 tick marks on HI and KL. Doesn't matter how many tick marks as long as they match up. And then the 3 tick marks on the third side. So all the sides are congruent. Also, all their corresponding angles are congruent. Symbol or word, whichever way you want to do it. So all their angles, so angle G and angle J. Angle G is congruent to angle J. Angle I is congruent to angle L. And HK. Angle H is congruent to angle K. They have to match up. They have to be corresponding when you write them out. And again, that reason is the triangles were congruent, which makes all of their corresponding parts congruent. Write out the whole phrase again. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Which we abbreviated before, CPCTC. So in this case, we're told the triangles are congruent. XYZ is congruent to ABC. So that means all of their corresponding sides are congruent, all their corresponding angles are congruent. So we could write that out. XYZ, ABC. So you can see the order that it goes. XYZ, ABC. And which sides are congruent? Side XY is congruent to side, we started with X, we got to start with A. Then we move on to the next side, YZ. YZ is congruent over here. We started with Y and went to Z, so we got to start with B and go to C. And then the third side, XZ. That's going to match up with this third side. Since we started with X, we got to start with A because those are in corresponding spots. XZ goes with AC. Angles goes kind of the same way. Angle X goes with angle A. So angle X is congruent to angle A. Angle Y, we got to put two arcs this time because we're moving on to our second angle, is congruent to angle B. And then our last one down here is angle Z. We've got to go up to 3 arcs congruent to angle C. And then why do we know all of that? The triangles were congruent, which means all their corresponding parts are congruent, which we abbreviate CPCTC. So we just made some statements, some true statements about these, so we can actually now apply what we just said and write some equations and solve them out. Since we just said that angle Z and angle C were congruent, that means their measurements are equal. So that means that we can take this 68 degrees, and that's going to be equal to angle C, which is 5x plus 8. If we knew something about angle B, we could have done the same thing over here and used B and Y, but we didn't know anything about B. The only two angles that matched up that we knew about were Z and C. So now you can use your algebra skills, subtract 8. Now we're trying to get X all alone, so we're going to divide by 5. And 60 divided by 5 is 12. So this next question is actually a little bit involved. It's a couple of steps. Find the measure of angle BAC. That's this one down here. Remember, whenever they use 3 letters, the vertex is always the middle letter. So that's kind of the same thing as saying angle A. BAC. You could trace it out. BAC. That's really the same as angle A. So we're trying to find that angle. Well, we know this one was 68 because we just matched those up. We know Y and B are congruent, and we know X and A are congruent. So we need to know all the angles. So we don't know anything about B, but we do know something about Y. Because Y is 3x minus 4. So the measure of angle Y is 3 times x minus 4. And we know what x is. X is 12. So it's 3 times 12 minus 4. Three times 12 is 36. 36 minus 4 is 32. This angle here is 32 degrees. So is this one. Because they're the same. They're corresponding. They're going to be the same. The question we are trying to find is, what is angle A, or angle BAC? So to figure out what it is, you have to remember that yesterday we talked about the 3 angles of a triangle always add to equal 180. So 32 plus 68 plus whatever angle A is. 32 plus 68 plus angle A has to equal 180. If you don't want to write measure of angle A, you could have wrote like x and then solve for x again or something. So finish it off. We can add these two numbers together. That's 100. So that means angle A, or angle BAC, whichever way you want to write it, it's just 80. This one's a little bit harder because when we look at these, they're not matched up. It's not a translation straight over. It's not a translation. It's a rotation. In order to make these match up, you have to rotate the whole thing, maybe about 180 degrees clockwise. Counterclockwise, doesn't really matter. But it's about 180 degrees, give or take. So when you rotate the shape around, you got to make sure that you're naming everything the way it's supposed to go. So here you can see how it's a rotation. That's pretty close. And that matches up. So that's the rotation. So that means that angle M, when you rotate it around, it's going to go with angle R. L is going to go with E. I'm going to color code all of these real quick. M goes with R. L, we just said, goes with E. And then P would match up with D. So it's important that you know which letters go with which, because that's how you're going to name everything. So we got to pick two sides that are congruent. ML is the first side that I'm writing down. That was red and blue and red in that order. Blue, red. Which means over here on the other triangle, it's going to go blue, red. So that goes with RE. Those sides are congruent. Then we can pick another side. How about MP? Blue-green is going to be congruent to blue-green. We want blue, then green, so we got to go blue, then green. R, and then D. And then our last side here, let's go red-green. We'll go red-green. So red-green was LP. Red to green, we got to go red to green. ED. And angles is kind of the same thing, but a little bit easier because we can just name them with one letter. In this case, angle M and angle R. And we can go red to red, angle L, angle E. And last we can go P and D, angle P, angle D. And then again, that 5 letters tells us why we know it. C, P, C, T, C. Corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. And then we can use all that information to solve some equations. Find the value of X. So we got to find some sides that match up. We got 1 tick mark and 1 tick mark. So what that tells us is that this side is also 5. We've got 2 tick marks and 2 tick marks. Those sides are equal. We can write an equation from that because we know both sides. 6x minus 3 equals 4x plus 5. And then we can solve that. So we're going to get our x's together on one side and solve for x. Use your algebra. So 2x minus 3 equals 5. Finish it off. 2 more steps. Add 3 to both sides. And then divide by 2. So x is 4. So to finish this now, the next part says find the perimeter of MLP. Well, since this side's 13, we know this side's 13. So if we're trying to find the perimeter, we know this side's 5, this side's 13. We need to find out what the MP side is. We just found out X was 4, so we can plug in 4. Plug in 4. 6 times 4 minus 3. 6 times 4 is 24. Minus 3 is 21. So both of these sides equal 21. And then perimeter is just add up all the sides. 5 plus 13 plus, we just found this side was 21. So that's 18 plus 21 is 39.